The Chicago Bulls full schedule was released yesterday, and while we did a quick reaction to the schedule, we're going to do a deeper dive into the schedule on this episode. We're also going to look at the Chicago Bulls spending over the last couple of years and just how cheap have the Chicago Bulls been. Bulls fans already know. And then we're going to look at Bleacher Report's predictions for the Chicago Bulls heading into next season. We're going to get into all that and more right after this.
You are now tuned in to Chicago Bulls Central, your number one place for all Chicago Bulls news and content.
What's going on, Bulls fans? Welcome to another episode of Chicago Bulls Central, your number one spot for everything Chicago Bulls related. I'm the host there, Haize, but more importantly, you guys can follow the channel at Bulls Central Pod on every social media platform we happen to be on. With that being said, let's go ahead and get into this content, y'all. And so we want to do a deeper dive into the schedule. We kind of talked about a little bit of the Bulls schedule and how the Bulls schedule is starting off. That first month of the season for the Bulls is going to be a doozy when you look at them starting off against the Pelicans, the Bucks, the Thunder, the Grizzlies, the Magic, Brooklyn Nets, not too worried about that, the Utah Jazz, the Dallas Mavericks, the Minnesota Timberwolves, the Atlanta Hawks, the Cleveland Cavaliers, the New York Knicks, Cleveland again, Houston, Detroit, Milwaukee, Atlanta, and Memphis. Those are the Bulls' first 16 games of the season. That is the first full month of the season from October 23rd to November 23rd for the Chicago Bulls. That is going to be a tough go. Then when you look at the fact of four out of the Bulls' first 5 games are also on the road. The Bulls have a very tough schedule, and I said in that reaction, we're going to kind of know who the Chicago Bulls team is, at least initially, very quickly into that season. It's not going to take very long to see where the Bulls kind of stack up amongst other teams. But outside of that first and difficult start of the season, how else? What are kind of some of the other intricacies of the Chicago Bulls schedule? You look at the Bulls; they have 5 nationally televised games, 3 on NBA TV, only 2 on ESPN. You look at November 7th against Minnesota, that's on NBA TV. November 20th against the Milwaukee Bucks, that's on ESPN. November 23rd against the Memphis Grizzlies, NBA TV. January 17th against Charlotte on ESPN, and then April 6th again against Charlotte again on NBA TV. That's not a lot of games when you look at it. The only teams with less nationally televised games than the Chicago Bulls is Detroit, Portland, and Toronto. And then if you look at the other teams that have 5 nationally televised games, you got Washington and Brooklyn. That shows you the tier that the NBA is expecting the Chicago Bulls to be in next season. And that's not a good one. Detroit, we already know they're not going to be that good next season unless, they got some talent there. Maybe some things come together for them. Portland's clearly a rebuilding team. Toronto has talent, right? They're rebuilding clearly around Scotty Barnes. They're trying to see if he can be a franchise player. They still got R.J. Barrett, quickly look good there. But again, that's still a team that didn't win very many games last season. Washington's going to be a shit show. And Brooklyn absolutely is going to be a team that is on Cooper flag watch from day one of the season until the end of the season. And the Bulls are right there amongst that grouping of teams by the NBA when you look at that nationally televised games. That really sucks. You look at the teams with the most nationally televised games. The New York Knicks and Boston Celtics have 34 games nationally televised, whereas the Dallas Mavericks and Phoenix Suns have 30 games nationally televised. Again, those are all clear playoff teams next year. And then you have the San Antonio Spurs, probably the only kind of notable team that didn't win a lot last year, that has a lot of nationally televised games at 21. But that's because it's Wemby. Like, he's an international star. They're going to put Wemby on TV as much as possible. Now, other things with the Chicago Bulls. Now, the Bulls do not have a Christmas Eve or Christmas Day game, but we do play on New Year's Day when we go on the road against the Washington Wizards. You also look at the back-to-backs for the Chicago Bulls. The Bulls have 13 back-to-backs next season. The average number of back-to-backs this NBA season is 14.9. That's up a little bit from last year, but it's down 23% from even just like 8 years ago. So the Bulls still play a high number of back-to-backs, which is another thing that makes this Bulls season grueling. And then on top of that, right, there's no team in the NBA that has four games in 5 nights anymore, no 8 games in 12 nights anymore, and no 18 and 30 nights. So they've really eased up that schedule before. And the teams won't play the day before or day after a high-profile national televised game. But again, that doesn't really fit the Chicago Bulls at all. I don't think we have any high-profile nationally televised games. So that's what it is, man. So the Bulls have no games on TNT, 2 on ESPN, 3 on NBA TV. No games on TNT, if I said that correctly. Outside little notes with the Bulls schedule. DeMar DeRozan comes back to the United Center on January 20th with that Sacramento Kings team. So that Alex Caruso comes back early in the year. We'll see what happens with that. Shea Gilgeous-Alexander and Josh Giddey and AC and all that type of thing. And then we play the Boston Celtics 3 times next season, and those three times in 7 games. So between November 29th and December 21st, we'll face off against the Boston Celtics 3 times. 3 times. We also have a crazy 6-game road trip, a West Coast road trip. That's crazy. That happens in March. That we face off against the Houston Texans, the Utah Jazz, the Phoenix Suns, the Sacramento Kings, and the Los Angeles Lakers. Oh, and the Denver Nuggets over that stretch as well. Again, the Bulls schedule is tough. And those 6 games are between March 15th and March 24th. That's towards the end of the season. That's a little bit after the All-Star break, about a month after the All-Star break. It's going to be a tough, grueling season for the Chicago Bulls. There's just no way around that when you look at it. And so, it now has kind of put some things into perspective for the Chicago Bulls, I think, right? With that difficult start to the season, a difficult stretch towards the end of the season in that West Coast road trip, on top of other things happening around this team. People who've been saying that they think the Bulls can win 40 games, I want to know how you guys feel after that. Now, for what it's worth, again, take this with a grain of salt. FanDuel has predicted the Bulls to win 27.5 games next season, whereas Bleacher Report has predicted the Bulls to win 30 games next season. So, again, you guys know my prediction for the Bulls is between like 30 and 35 wins next season for this team. And that's also you got to look at what happens with Zach, what happens with Vooch, how many trades do the Bulls make, because that number could go low. Now, for the Bulls' credit, they've been above the predictions and the odds as far as record for them the last 2 or 3 years. So, take that as well into consideration. It seems like the betting odds just never really favor the Chicago Bulls. So that is what it is. And so even if you factor in the Bulls being a little bit over that 27.5, still getting back to that 39 games in the Bulls won last season, it's going to be a little bit difficult. So we'll see what happens there. Overall, this is it's going to be an exciting time. I'm going to be working my ass off. The fact that we have 13 back-to-backs is going to make it interesting for the Chicago Bulls team next season. But, we'll be live for every single game, as we always are, as we have been basically since this channel has started. So make sure you guys stay in tune with us for that. But overall, just kind of taking a step back and zooming out and looking at the schedule. I like the fact that the Bulls do have a New Year's Day game. That's fun. Watching my team on New Year's Day, it is what it is there. The fact that the Bulls did not have very many nationally televised games does not surprise me at all. We're just not that level of team. And, you're going through a rebuild. There's so much uncertainty. And while, Kobe White had a really good season last year, you still got to have some, there's some trepidation around the Chicago Bulls, understandably so. And we'll get into why some of that trepidation is there when we talk about the Bulls spending basically since 2017. But outside of that, the schedule is what it is. You got to face who's above you. I mean, the NBA isn't going to do you any favors or anything like that. And we'll see what the Bulls can do. If the Bulls end up being better, let's say that Josh Giddey does come in and he plays at the level that a lot of Bulls fans and myself think that he can, and this team is rocking and rolling because Kobe takes a step. Io continues his step. Zach LaVine fits in, right? They can flex games. That's one thing that the NBA has worked in with this TV deal. NBA games can be flexed, especially on NBA TV. And so if any of those matchups get, now you can also be flexed out of nationally televised games, which would be something interesting to watch. But for my Bulls fans outside of Chicago, make sure you guys are locked in, man. You guys are going to have to, unless there's other ways to watch. We're not going to get into that here. But, hey, NBA TV, League Pass is going to be a big thing. I think I order League Pass every year. I just watch that much basketball regardless, so it's always a worthwhile spending for me. But, hey, League Pass is going to be important if you want to watch every Chicago Bulls game. But even if you can't watch the game, you know what? I'll be having post-game shows here, live here, after every single game during the season. And we're also doing the 82 nights of drip because I'm going to have every single game next season. All 82 games is going to be a new level of drip. So just stay in tune for that because I got to come for the crown. There's been a lot. Nobody was wearing Bulls merch like before Haize was doing it. Not like Haize was. Now all of a sudden everybody want to try to wear their Bulls merch and they hats consistently on their shows, things like that. Ain't nobody really doing it like me, but that's just a little humble brag. But moving on from the schedule, I want to get into the next thing that I want to talk about before we get into how cheap the Bulls have been, because they have been cheap. But before we get into that, which we'll end the show on, I want to get into Bleacher Report's predictions for the Chicago Bulls. Now, some of these I agree with, some of them I don't, but I think it's a kind of an interesting perspective on the Bulls, and it gives us something to talk about and see how you guys feel about it. So, Bleacher Report predicted Josh Giddey to finish in the top 3 of triple-doubles in the NBA next season. Now, when you look at that for what it's worth, Josh Giddey was tied for 8th most triple-doubles last season, and he's been in the top 10 of triple-doubles each of his 3 years in the NBA. So, considering that Josh Giddey is coming to the Chicago Bulls, they're going to put the ball in his hands more, do more of the things that kind of have suited and made Josh Giddey look the best, and that's him having the ball in his hands and not having to share it with like a Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and things like that. They're still going to have to share it with Kobe, but to a much lesser extent than the MVP caliber player in Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, right? So the opportunity, Bleacher Report notes that the opportunity that Josh Giddey is about to have is going to help catapult him up into being one of the best, the players with the most triple-doubles heading into next season. Now, the thing that I have, adding my own thing to this, is that getting all the triple-doubles is fine. Like, don't get me wrong. It's a stat. It matters, right? Like, but how does those triple-doubles contribute to wins? And the thing that I am, when me and Pat, the designer, for example, over on Locked on Bulls, talked about, like, concerns over Josh Giddey's contract. Like, you guys know, I've been a pro Josh Giddey guy since he got traded to the Bulls, really kind of looking at his game and how it could fit in and how it really could, make this offense a lot more dynamic, right? But the thing is that let's say that Josh Giddey let's say, God forbid, he leads the league in triple-double. And you then have to max him out. And I mean, give him the max that he's available for, which I think is like $215 million. The question that I asked there is that, are we right back in the same situation that we are with Zach LaVine right now? Meaning that, yeah, you can build a team or try to continue to build a team, but yeah, you're a little bit more cash strapped. You're then spending max level money on a player that is severely limited. And I would say this, Josh Giddey is even more limited offensively right now than Zach LaVine. But again, Josh Giddey, he's improved as a three-point shooter every single year. We know he can be as a passer. We know, and even he's improved defensively over the years as well when you get into the weeds of the numbers. But it's just that concern is in the back of my head. I hope that Josh Giddey blows past all the expectations and that all the doubt around Josh Giddey, that he comes to this team and proves a lot of his doubters wrong. He's going to have the ball in his hands. He's going to be able to do and play in the way that's kind of best suited for his game. Him and Kobe are going to have to figure out that dynamic for sure. But I think when you look at what the Bulls have around, Patrick Williams can fit really good to Josh Giddey. I even think Zach LaVine fits with Josh Giddey for however long he's on this team. Jalen Smith is another player, which we'll talk about later on in these predictions, is another player and Modest Bucilis, Julian Phillips. These guys really could play really well next to Josh Giddey as far as getting out and into transition a lot more. And we'll see what ultimately comes of it. But predicting that Josh Giddey is in the top 3 of triple-doubles, hell, when you look at it last season, him averaging almost 14 points per game, 7 rebounds, and almost 6 assists on a down year, yeah, there's reason to think that Josh Giddey could be towards the top of the league in triple-doubles next season. So it's not a bad prediction by Bleacher Report, per my estimation. The next one that Bleacher Report had predicted, Jalen Smith leads the Bulls in center starts. Now, this is an interesting thing. Keep in mind, we had the video was it late last week and maybe early this week, in which we talked about Jalen Smith being promised an opportunity to earn the starting center role. And, a lot of Bulls fans say, well, why the center? Shouldn't he be power forward? All that. You still need to have a big on the bench. So if you were, let's even take away whatever position you think. I think Jalen Smith at 6'10", 240-some pounds with 7'1" wingspan, he's absolutely fine at center. But you need to have a backup big. And Adama Sanogo is a two-way contract player. He's not on the regular roster. You have nobody else unless you're playing Torrey Craig backup center minutes, which you can do, and I wouldn't put it past him. But it's not ideal. So you're probably not going to start Jalen Smith and Nikola Vucevic together because that you don't have any other depth behind those guys as a true center, right? So with that said, but when you look at it, they point out the fact that how he made 61 three-pointers last year on a 42% clip, and he's averaged more than a block per 36 minutes each of his NBA seasons so far through 4 years. They also talk about how he's a better fit at the 5 for this roster than what Nikola Vucevic is, with his ability to get up and down the court, weak side defense with block shots. He's not a great on-ball defender, but neither is Nikola Vucevic, so you're not really losing much there. But the length, the ability to run the court with your guards and Kobe White, Josh Giddey, Ayo Dosunmu when they're running that point, that makes a lot of sense. And I think this is an interesting one, right? When we heard, and I said it on the episode, when we heard that Jalen Smith was promised an opportunity to win that starting center position, it made sense in a lot of ways to me. And I was favorable of that, right? I think when you look at the makeup of this roster, playing more modern, getting up and down, the question is that will they? And we know Billy Donovan. He really trusts and relies on his vets. If Billy Donovan, let's say that we do come out of training camp and Jalen Smith is the starting center, that changes some things. Like, so, again, I think also that Vooch can still be a productive player. How productive can he be off the bench? I think that the question that you have there is that even your players on the bench theoretically are going to want to play faster. You look at Ayo Dosunmu, Modest Bucilis, even Torrey Craig kind of thrives in a faster paced offense. Julian Phillips, Dalen Terry, Lonzo Ball, if he gets minutes. These guys kind of thrive in transition. So, we'll see what happens there. But, that prediction, that's an interesting one. Keep an eye out on that one. The next step, Patrick Williams pops up in trade talks. Now, this is a harder to quantify one. And the reason why I say that is technically anybody can pop up in trade rumors. Now, when you talk about trade talks versus trade rumors, it's how is the front office actively making or taking calls on trading Patrick Williams? That's the question that I have here, and that's kind of where I doubt some. Now, of course, they point out the lack of development for Patrick Williams in certain areas, things like that. They do say that, hey, Patrick Williams can still find a way to elevate his game, but they also talk about how he's a capable 3-and-D player that can also shoot threes with semi-volume, right? And because of that, he is the type of player that teams could be looking to make moves for at the trade deadline. He's locked in to a long-term contract extension, which theoretically gets you more back. And then you also have to look at, and I've said this before on an episode, who's behind Patrick Williams. Now, if Julian Phillips, Modest Bucilis, if either one of these guys shows, hey, we may have some starter level upside sooner rather than later. Modest Bucilis, he's going to be one of the starting forwards sooner rather than later, whether it's the 3, whether it's the 4. But if you can look at and say, hey, Julian Phillips looks good for us this year defensively. He's more energetic. He's kind of even more engaged at times than Patrick Williams. If the Bulls feel that way and Patrick loses that starting position again, I wouldn't be surprised if he pops up in trade rumors. I don't know about the trade talks yet. I still think this front office is very, very committed to Patrick Williams, in my personal opinion. But I guess we'll see over the course of the season. But to recap, let me know how you guys feel on these down below. Just to recap, Josh Giddey, as far as Bleacher Report's predictions, Josh Giddey ranks in the top 3 of triple-doubles for the NBA next season. Jalen Smith leads the Chicago Bulls in center starts, so number of games started by a center, and that Patrick Williams pops up in trade talks next season. Let me know what you guys think about those 3 predictions by Bleacher Report. Now, let's get into the shit. This it shouldn't be triggering because I think all Bulls fans understand that the Bulls don't spend money. Now, we're going to talk about the Bulls' luxury tax spending. So let's get into that. Just to kind of bring this all. When teams that pay over the luxury tax, half that money goes into revenue sharing. So meaning that, let's say it's just to make it even. Let's say NBA teams spend $300 million combined in luxury tax payments. 150 of that would go to the league, right, as far as what they use for marketing, all that type of thing. The other half of that, 150 million of that, would then go and be split up between NBA teams. So that's the way they look at it, right? For example, there were 8 teams above the luxury tax in 2023-24. They paid a total of $526.6 million in taxes. Half of that amount, $263 million, went back to the other 22 teams that did not pay the luxury tax. It's almost $12 million per team that did not do that. So when you look at it, since 2017, the Chicago Bulls have paid no luxury tax money, which means that they have gotten back $45.5 million in kickbacks from the luxury tax payments of other teams over the course of what is that? That's 7 years, over the course of the 7 years. Since that time, the Chicago Bulls have, of course, won no NBA titles. They've gone to no NBA finals. They've only been in the playoffs once, and they've been in the lottery 6 times in that time period. And I'm never one to say that paying the luxury tax means that you're being successful NBA teams. There are teams that pay the luxury tax that don't look good. There are teams that don't pay the luxury tax that had pretty good, deep playoff runs. But it's that spending and non-commitment to your NBA team that continually frustrates Chicago Bulls fans, right? It's the fact that you've been getting this money from not paying the luxury tax. At what point? And we know that we've had the overarching thing from Jerry of, I pay to keep a contender together. What does that mean, right? So it just adds to the frustration that a lot of Bulls fans have when we see a certain investments or the Bulls, for example, let's say this thing, you didn't get the first round pick back in a sign and trade for DeMar DeRozan, all because you hard capped yourself early and you weren't able to take Harrison Barnes' contract back. Had you been able to take that contract back, you would have gotten the first round pick. That's a pick swap, but it's unprotected, right? You would have gotten that back. So it's kind of spending like that we look at the Chicago Bulls. I'm not saying that paying the luxury tax would all of a sudden make the Chicago Bulls team a perennial playoff team, because you still have to make smart decisions as a franchise. But when you're in a place of going through a pseudo rebuild and you're not able to get the best assets out of trading one of your better players, listen, you got 2 second-round picks. You got Chris Duarte. We'll see how that works out for you. But the situation that the Bulls have consistently found themselves in has been that we don't end up getting the certain assets back that we could, even when we do move on from players, because of our avoidance of paying too much money. And so I do understand as well that you don't want to get into that slippery slope where you're paying luxury tax after luxury tax just for a team that's disappointing in the playoffs or a first-round exit every year. I get that part of the argument too. But like, you are taking assets potentially out of your hands because of your reluctance to spend money like a big market franchise. Chicago is one of the biggest markets in the world. And yet we operate like a very small market mindset. And again, now that there's 2 luxury tax thresholds, like, nobody's saying go into the second apron. No, that's too penalizing. But come on, let's be smart about our spending. And it is what it is. When I saw those numbers, it just kind of made me think like, hey, this is what a lot of Bulls fans kind of complain about a lot. But let me know what you guys think on all that down below. Make sure you guys are following the show at Bulls Central Pod. You can send us any feedback, questions, comments, concerns. BullsCentralPod@gmail.com. Lastly, if you want to leave a text message and our voicemail for the mailbag, the number to do so, 773-270-2799. We're the number 1 spot for everything Chicago Bulls related, but that's thanks to you guys. And like I like to end every episode on, go Bulls. Love you guys. See red if you can, y'all. Peace.
This has been a presentation of the Break Media.